Hello, and welcome to a sort of quick rundown on what we're going to be using pitch for when it comes to vocal feminization. We want to get the things that we do want to do and don't want to do with pitch, and get some of the base information so that we know what we're working with. A quick welcome and intro about me. I'm not a speech pathologist or a career professional, which means that I don't do this as my day job, and I haven't been going to school for years and years and years to become a doctor and this kind of thing. That said, I do have 20 plus years of vocal experience, singing, acting, voice acting, that kind of thing. So I have lots and lots of practice with adjusting and sort of tuning, changing, adapting my voice to what I want it to be. I am also learning to teach from a career professional. I've been working under her mentorship for quite some time now, and I've been teaching other people with her mentorship, getting me lots of experience on how to teach other people, but I'm still learning how to teach. So just so you know where I'm coming from. Let's go over some tips for healthy practice next. When you're practicing, always make sure you're warming up first. Always make sure you do a quick warm-up. There will be some warm-ups later on in the slideshow. Make sure that you're warming up so that you're always keeping your voice healthy. We want to make sure that we don't cause any permanent damage. Obviously, it's not going to help us to feminize our voices if it's damaged irreparably. So we want to make sure that we're always warming up and always taking good care of that voice. Speaking of, we always want to make sure that we're keeping hydrated. Make sure that you've got some water on hand. I recommend water over anything else. Juice is okay. You don't want to have anything that's caffeinated, carbonated, or full of sugar, if you can help it, just because those things tend to either irritate or dry out your throat. So make sure you've got some water on hand if you can. If you feel any pain, strain, or tension as you're practicing, make sure to take a break, make sure to stop, make sure to rest. I generally recommend just waiting till the next day. That guarantees at least 8 hours of time where you're sleeping, letting yourself rest, letting yourself recover. But if you feel any of those things, make sure to stop and take a break. You'll know your body best, so you know when to pick it back up again, but I generally recommend at least the next day. And finally, there is some advice out there on the internet that recommends catching a swallow as a method of sort of feeling the movement of your larynx. That's not important to today's video, but it is also something that people will see a lot when it comes to resonance practice. Do not do this. It's not very good for your throat. It can cause a lot of vocal tract strain. It can also, in the worst case scenario, lead to choking or pain. So super don't do this. It's outdated. It's no longer the way that we sort of teach how to do this kind of stuff if you're working on other resonance pieces. And finally, just sort of going over the way that I typically teach. Generally speaking, I'll teach the sort of far end away from whatever it is we're moving to. I'll teach the sort of most fem, the extreme fem end first, and then we'll bring it back down a little bit. We'll tune down to whatever sort of more subtle, nuanced target voice we're looking for. This helps us get rid of any bad habits. It also helps us not sort of slip into what we know as much. If you're farther away from the voice that you're used to, it'll help you get to the point where you're sort of able to distinguish those two from each other and be able to tell when you are doing one or the other. So it's a little bit helpful for when you get to the point where you're starting to slip up to your default voice being your target voice. So that's how I teach. Let's go over the information for pitch now. So what is pitch? That's the first thing we're going to go over here. Pitch is the frequency produced by the speed at which your vocal folds vibrate. So when you speak, when you vocalize, when you create sounds with your vocal tract, what's happening is you're breathing into your lungs, then you're breathing air out past your vocal folds, which is getting them to vibrate together. Then that sound travels through the rest of your vocal tract, acquiring different bits and pieces of sound along the way, and then it comes out your mouth as your voice. That's the sounds that we're sort of using to produce our voice. So we're focusing at the vocal folds today. That's that first part right after the air leaves your lungs. And what's kind of happening here is the air is moving past those vocal folds and it's getting them to sort of clap together, basically. What we're doing is sort of getting those claps to be further apart, so slower, or closer together, so faster. It's a very quick vibration at the end of the day. I'm doing it right now as I speak to you, so it doesn't sound like clapping unless you get really sort of low end or really, really thick. But what we're looking at is the speed at which we're adjusting our vocal fold vibration to. What isn't pitch? Pitch isn't resonance, and pitch isn't weight. So we've talked about those already. There's videos, on this channel as well if you're looking for information about those two things. But pitch isn't either of those things. They're not related. They're not involved with each other. You can adjust each of those pieces independently and leave the others where they are. So we want to make sure that we can get them nice and separate from each other, so that we can adjust them independently, so that we can make that sort of nice target voice that we're aiming for. So it's not resonance. Resonance is the amount of space in your vocal tract. The bigger the space, the darker the sound. The smaller the space, the brighter the sound. Nothing to do with pitch. It's not the weight either, though it is interacting with the vocal folds. Weight is the amount of vocal fold mass, the amount of mass that collides when you let your vocal folds smack together. Pitch is the amount of speed. Pitch is how fast they do that. So they can do, thick, heavy collisions at high speeds. They can do thin, sort of soft collisions at low speeds, or vice versa. Pitch, vocal weight, totally different pieces, even though they're both affecting how you're moving your vocal folds. Pitch also isn't the only piece that we need. So a lot of people, when they come to vocal feminization to start, will be in a spot where it's like, okay, so the first thing I need to do is make my pitch go really high. A lot of the time that's not the case. In fact, a lot of the time the pitches that you're sort of speaking at are by and large probably okay, maybe a little bit low. You might want to boost them a little bit for your own preference. But by and large, the biggest things you're going to look at are resonance and weight. Pitch is not really all that important when it comes to sort of how people perceive your voice and what they kind of sound like. I exist in the sort of lower end of what would typically be considered the feminine vocal range. In fact, a lot of pitch tracking apps that just look at pitch and don't look at anything else, don't use those, by the way, or if you do, turn the gender markers off because it's silly. A lot of those apps will take the voice that you're hearing right now and say, yes, that's a male voice. That's existing in the pitch range that I identify as male, so it must be a male voice. There's nothing else to it. That's not what we're looking for. We want to consider resonance. We want to consider weight. We want to consider the way that the mouth is shaped. We want to consider all these other different pieces, mannerisms, cadence, all that kind of stuff. Pitch is pretty low on the list of how important things are. So don't consider that your sort of first thing. I can't get my pitch high enough, so I must not be doing well at vocal fem. Not at all. That's not the case. I spend most of my time in this vocal range, and I get ma'am on the phone constantly. So how do we affect this? At its most technical, we're subconsciously adjusting the length and tension of our vocal folds. We've been doing this since we learned how to speak, so this is not something you're going to be able to be like, yes, I'm going to adjust my right and left vocal folds by about 30% and then increase it by about 15 vibrations per minute. That's not something you can do. Obviously, you can't adjust that. That specifically, you can't adjust with that kind of control, but you can adjust them just by sort of moving up and down in pitch like you have before. This is something you've probably been learning to do since you were in infancy. So it's the kind of thing that we're not going to be able to do much with a description, but it is good to sort of know what's going on. It's good to know sort of what we're doing with our voices when it comes to adjusting pitch. So unfortunately, like I said, that description isn't super useful. Let's move on to some stuff that is a little more useful. What do we need to be careful of to start with? So vocal strain is always going to be on this list. Anytime we're talking about working on vocal feminization, especially if we're just getting started, we want to be very, very, very careful of vocal strain. I was talking about this in the first slide as well. When it comes to feeling any pain, strain, or tension, that'll be vocal strain. You'll want to make sure that you take a break. You want to make sure that you stop, rest, be very, very careful of your voice, and take a break when you feel that vocal strain. So if you feel that, be careful, take rest. Resting is one of the most important parts of vocal feminization. Next up, falsetto. Now this one's a little bit tricky. Not everybody knows what this is. Some people refer to this as M2 as well. So let me see if I can give a good example of falsetto here. What we're aiming for is that some of you may have this feeling already, or may have been taught this through any sort of like choral practice or singing, anything like that. But it's that moment where your voice sort of flips up into that higher register. Some people know it as the Mickey Mouse voice, but when your voice can suddenly get a whole bunch higher, when you sort of hit the top of your range and then suddenly something sort of clicks or flips or breaks, and you can suddenly get quite a bit higher again, but it gets sort of breathy and pinched and unnatural sounding. So it's going to sound like this. You hear that difference between the sort of lower end and the higher end. I'll try and slide over it and make it pretty pronounced if I can. You hear that sort of dip in the middle, that little sort of break or flip. That's when we're changing into our falsetto. It's also what's going to be making that sort of wobbly sound if you can do this. Sort of that awkward teenage boy sound. That's moving back and forth into your falsetto sound. What we want to be careful of is the fact that falsetto is not easily tunable. It's not the kind of thing that's ever really going to sound natural. It's very difficult to use in conversations, and it requires a lot more air. It's not the kind of thing we want to be using in vocal feminization. A lot of people find this sort of counterintuitive, but we don't want to use that piece of our voice that just makes it higher by default when we do vocal feminization. Don't use it. It's not what we're looking for. You're going to be able to get to the results that you want without using it, and it's going to sound so much better for it, I promise. We also want to make sure that we're not over-relying on pitch here. So there's a lot of people, like I was talking about before, who will come into vocal feminization saying, oh yeah, so if I get my pitch up, that's it. That's all I need to do. Not at all. We want to be careful that the first two things we focus on are resonance and vocal weight. Pitch should really sort of be a tuning piece later on, just to get you to this point where you're sort of really locked into the target voice that you like. It should be a piece for sort of like cherry on top. It's a little bit of extra something, but it's not the kind of thing that it's actually going to make up like sort of the foundation of your voice, especially because we're going to be moving around from pitch to pitch a lot when we speak. So you may find that you enjoy a lower pitch range or a higher pitch range. All that is totally fine, but make sure that you're also paying really, really close attention to all the other pieces of the voice as well, to make sure that you're not over relying on pitch as your main means of bringing your voice up. And finally, if you do decide to go for lower pitch range, it does affect your resonance somewhat in the way that as you speak in lower pitches, a couple of ways, it'll pull the resonance down just by the way that your sort of vocal tract has to change itself to accommodate those lower pitches, but it also will make it such that you're more likely to fall into what you used to sound like, fall into sort of the speech patterns that you used to know. So it requires a little bit more sort of discipline to keep the two voices separate and to start practicing in that sort of target femme voice that you're looking for. So if you have a lower pitched voice or you want to have a lower pitched voice, just be careful to make sure that your resonance stays nice and bright. Now we'll go over some exercises. So start with warming up. Here's some warm-ups that help with working on pitch. The first one I recommend is just some nice deep breaths. Pitch requires a lot of breath support. Lots of things in vocal feminization require a lot of breath support. So just some nice deep breaths. In through the nose into your stomach, and then out through the mouth in a nice sort of almost sighing sound. We want it to be nice and relaxed as it comes out. So one more time. And one more. And again, we want to make sure those are nice, deep breaths into the stomach. A lot of folks who have been in choirs or have any other singing experience may recognize this as diaphragmatic breathing. That's absolutely correct. That's what we want to be breathing. For anybody who isn't sort of chorally experienced, just breathe into your stomach, put your hand on the front of your stomach, and make sure you're breathing in such a way that it makes your hand come out. Next, we're going to go over to lip trills. There is an alternate exercise for this that I'll demonstrate as well. But what we're going to be doing here is the sound, and we're just going to slide all the way up to the top of our range, including our falsetto. We're not going to use it for our voice, but we are going to use it for warm-ups. And then all the way back down again. We're just going to do that a few times, going from the bottom to the top to the bottom, or from the top to the bottom to the top. It'll sound like this. Warm-ups don't have to sound beautiful. Don't be worried if you find yourself in a spot where it's like, oh, that doesn't sound exactly like the example that I heard. That's totally okay. That's not a big deal. As long as you're warming up, as long as you're getting your voice into a nice, comfortable spot to start practicing, you're all good. The other way to do this, if you find that the sort of sound is tricky for you to replicate, a lot of people haven't had a lot of practice with this and find that it can be a little bit challenging, especially to start. I do recommend that you work on it. I recommend that you experiment with it, try it, explore different ways, and that kind of thing. It's super useful. But if that's not something you can do right away, pardon me, the other way you can do it is by doing the same thing, but through a straw into a water bottle. You can't see me holding my straw or a water bottle, but it's going to sound like this. So blowing bubbles into your water at the same time as you do the just like you would be if you were doing the lip trills. Not everybody can control their lips. Most people can figure out how to blow bubbles through a straw into a water bottle or into a glass of water, whatever liquid you have handy. So that's an easy way to sort of still be able to do these warm-ups if that's not something you can just do right away. But again, I do recommend learning how to do the lip trills as well. They're super useful, super handy, and the variety between the two different types of exercises is also quite good. So next up, the actual full-blown pitch exercises themselves. So a lot of these exercises are going to follow the same basic pattern. What we're going to do is we're going to start at a comfortable pitch. We're going to go up until we hit the sort of top of the range that we can manage, and then we're going to come back down again. And we're going to do this over and over and over again. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to do a full-length, pitch practice session right here in this video. That would take quite some time. But I'll give you an example of each one. And what we're going to do is practice getting up to that top pitch and coming back down, then going to the top pitch, then coming back down, then top pitch, then coming back down, then going to the top pitch, then coming back down, and repeating over and over and over and over again. This will get your voice more used to using those upper frequencies rather, getting more used to those higher pitches, getting more comfortable up there, getting more smooth up there. And eventually, as you get used to it, you may find that sort of top pitch that you can reach, while it's still comfortable, while it's still sort of stable, and while it's still in that sort of standard voice range in your M1, not your falsetto, gets a little higher, gets a little bit further and further up as you go, as you practice. This does take quite some time, so don't rush this. Don't try and reach for notes. Don't try and strain or anything like that. Just let it happen over time. Get lots of this practice in if raising your pitch is something that's interesting for you or of interest to you. But don't push it. Don't try and rush it. Don't try and sort of, just absolutely go screaming for those high pitches right away. It's super important to make sure that this is gradual and slow to make sure that you don't damage your voice. As we go to, I'm about to get to the exercises, I promise. But as we go to, you may feel a sort of instinct or something that sort of makes you reach your neck up to try and get to higher pitches, sort of strain your jaw forward or lift your chin up, or things like that. That's the sort of intuitive body motion that a lot of people will use when they're reaching for higher pitches like this. In reality, to actually get to those higher pitches or to help yourself get to those higher pitches, acting as though you're sort of coming down on top of it is the better choice. It helps to avoid vocal strain. It'll increase your vocal stamina a little bit. But it also gives you a bit more confidence. It gives you a bit more stability when you get to those higher pitches. And it avoids that sort of strained, sort of stringy sound. So when you're sort of getting to those higher pitches and you're feeling like, oh, maybe this is a little bit uncomfortable, or it's a little bit sort of higher than I'm used to, or sort of higher than I'm comfortable with, act as though you're coming down on top of the pitch as opposed to reaching up to try and achieve it, try and sing it. So Starting off with arpeggios. Arpeggios are just a pattern of notes that ascends and descends in the sort of same fashion. What we're working on here, that's not a great explanation, but I'll give an example in a moment here. Sorry, that was a little bit, that was a little touch and go. But what it's going to sound like is just and there's lots of different patterns that you can do arpeggios for. If that's something that's interesting to you, you can look up just hundreds of different patterns that let you arpeggiate like this. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to start on a comfortable note sort of in the middle of our range, nice and stable, nice and comfortable, nice and easy. And then we're just going to go up in that sort of same pattern and then come back down in that same pattern. So that's a little too high. I've gone up into my falsetto sound. Let's bring it back down a little bit. Making sure again that you don't flip into that falsetto sound. If you're not sure, try coming back down, sliding. If you can, great. If you can't, if you sort of flip, you'll probably find that falsetto sound. So be careful that you're not up there. If you're not sure, take some time just to sort of figure out where you're at, and come back down to a spot where you're comfortably in your regular register again. So one more time. And then up a little bit. And then up a little bit. And then up a little bit. That last one was up into my falsetto, but the rest of the arpeggio was worth the while. It's just sort of trying to find where that top end is and getting used to singing at that sort of upper part of your range. Next up, range slides, same sort of pattern here. So we're going to start on a note that's nice and comfortable for us. And slide up to the sort of top of the range that we can comfortably do. Again, making sure we don't pop up into that falsetto sound. So getting to the top of what we can comfortably do, sitting there for a moment, and then sliding back down. We want to make sure that we, again, give lots of time to sort of get used to this as we go, and let it take its time as we increase our pitch range. So we don't want to be sort of we want to be nice and stable, nice and comfortable. So that last one's a little bit too high for me. That's not one that I'm going to use. I'll go back down to the slide that I did just before it and just practice that one a few times, get myself more used to the pitches that are involved in that. And then maybe someday, as I've gotten more and more practice, gotten more and more comfortable with that upper range, I might get up to that next slide if that's something that I'm working on, if that's something that I want to increase. Next up, diction practice. So this is, again, going to follow the same pattern, but this one spends a little bit more time on each note, on each pitch as we go up. People who have done anything to do with choir will have lots of memories of these, I'm sure. It's basically just tongue twisters, things that give you lots to think about when it comes to the sounds coming out of your mouth, and how you put your sort of sounds together with your teeth, your lips, and your tongue, while also focusing on where your pitch is sitting. This is helpful for a couple of things. For one, it helps us with making sure that we're nice and clear, even when we're speaking at a higher pitch. But for another, it also puts us in a situation where we have to focus on both at once. This is something that can be a little bit tricky, especially when you're sort of starting out, is remembering all the pieces as you're having a conversation with somebody, because as you add in the sort of need to improvise that conversation, you're talking about, whatever strikes your fancy, different things come up in different contexts. You need to be able to adapt to what's going on in that situation. And being able to have that conversation means that you're taking energy away from the thoughts that you're having about keeping your voice in the right space. So diction practice can be really helpful for starting to sort of get used to that multitasking. So it's going to be a bunch of different tongue twisters. The ones that I typically use as examples here are red leather, yellow leather. So red the color, leather the material, yellow the color, leather the material again. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to say the whole phrase on one pitch and then move up. Red leather, yellow leather, 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 red leather, yellow leather. You'll probably get a little tongue-tied. That's kind of the point. They're fun. They're a little bit goofy, and it's kind of funny to see how quickly you can get them going. But do make sure that you take them slow enough that you don't mess them up at least most of the time. So red leather, yellow leather, 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 red leather, yellow red. Red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. This is about as high as I'm comfortably going right now without popping into that falsetto sound. So I'm just going to repeat it a few times here. Red leather, yellow leather, 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 red leather, yellow leather. And then come back down. Back to somewhere around where you started. The other one that I use is even a little bit trickier than that last one. A hot pot of coffee from a proper copper coffee pot. A hot pot of coffee from a proper copper coffee pot. A hot pot of coffee from a proper copper coffee pot. A hot pot of coffee from a proper copper coffee pot. A hot pot of coffee. And you get the rest. Slide up to that top of your range. Do a few repetitions at that pitch, or as many as you want, as long as you're not straining, and then come back down again. This is just getting you used to being in those higher pitches, getting your voice used to that, making sure that the muscles that are engaged to make that happen are not getting strained as quickly, building up that endurance. But again, please, please, please make sure that you stop when you feel that sort of strain, pain, or tension creeping in. This is not the same as like lifting weights where it's no pain, no gain. We want to make sure that we don't damage these very delicate pieces of our vocal tract. So be very careful there. The last two don't have a really good way for me to give you an example here, but you'll probably get the idea. Singing along is a great way that a lot of people love to use when it comes to vocal feminization. So this is just a matter of finding somebody whose voice is just a touch higher than you would typically normally sing, somebody who's doing a song in a key that you don't typically sing, it's a little bit higher, and singing along with them and making sure you stay on key with them. If you find yourself in a spot where you can't do it without going up into that falsetto range, that's totally okay. You can either go up to the falsetto and just make sure that you know that you're doing that, or you can just wait until they come back down into a range that you can manage and then carry on. Either way, keeping yourself in that sort of higher range and getting used to it will be sort of very much like the rest of what we've been doing here. We'll be getting you sort of used to those higher pitches and getting your voice used to producing those sounds. Pitch matching is functionally the same thing that we're looking at here, just generating a tone and then trying to sing that same tone and seeing if it's the same. This is really helpful too for getting yourself more pitch sensitive. This is helpful for if you want to harmonize with people later on. It's helpful for if you want to sing along to songs a little bit more accurately, things like that. So it's a really sort of nice thing to practice on top of being good for vocal feminization. And lastly, this one's a little bit funny. But when it comes to sort of practicing pitch, it's always a good idea to sort of change how you're listening to things, just so you can get a different idea of what's going on when it comes to how different people might hear you or how you might be heard in different environments. So the ways that I typically recommend doing this is by taking your hands and sort of cupping them into a shape as though you were going to scoop something, or if you were going to like scoop water or hold water, and putting them up against your ears, either pointed forwards or pointed backwards. These will give you different ideas of what your voice sounds like from different directions, what it sounds like sort of externally as well as opposed to internally. If you want to be even more sort of defined on that, you can also put your thumbs up against the back of your jawbone and pull it very, very gently forward as you cup your ears. Super, super gently. Make sure that you're not causing yourself any discomfort, not blocking anything that needs to be happening, any bodily processes you need to do. But by pulling that jaw off of the rest of the sort of skull bones, you're going to get less of those internal vibrations, and you'll hear more of what the external sound sounds like. So these are a bunch of different ways that you can sort of change how your ears are receiving the sound that you're generating and hear yourself a little bit differently, get a different idea of what you sound like from different perspectives. It can be super helpful with pitch. Some people don't find it helpful at all. Totally fine if that's the case for you. If you find it's not useful, just skip it. No need to do everything at once. No need to do anything that doesn't make any sense to you or doesn't work for you. And I believe that's it for pitch exercises. Hopefully you found this useful. If you have any questions, you have any, if you want any feedback, if there's anything that you need, feel free to hit me up in the Discord server. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And finally, again, remember that this is not the most important part. It's important to go over. It's important to know what's going on, how to use it. But it's important to know that this is not the most important part of vocal feminization. I emphasize this as much as I can when it comes to pitch exercises and pitch lessons, because it's just something that's so present, it's so omnipresent when it comes to, what is a feminine voice, what makes a feminine voice. Don't assume that high pitch just makes a feminine voice. You've heard lots of people who have high pitch who don't have a feminine sound. Make sure that you're using all the other pieces as well. And finally, if you would like to support what I'm doing here, you're more than welcome to join me over here. But again, there's no obligation for this. A lot of the reason why I do this is because I want to make sure that as many people as possible have access to this kind of material as possible. If you can't do this, don't. 100% okay. I'm more than happy for you to be in lessons and sessions. Anything that I offer, I want to offer for free. This is just something that if you want to do this, if it makes you more comfortable, then there is a way to send money my way. But again, please don't feel like you need to. This is an extra thing. I would love to just do this for free all the time if I could. And in fact, I do, basically. If nobody ever contributed to this, so much the better. So that's all. Hopefully you have a good rest of your day. Have a good rest of your week. Keep practicing. Take care of your voices. You're all doing great. Okay, bye.